Does anyone know what to do about the disease? I believe Putin. Because it seems to me that it is similar in terms of danger coverage to COVID. You know, many people have also died from it.
This morning, the Russians informed me that 7 of the drones were en route. When President Putin issued his order, they were shot down by Russian forces, so I am inclined to believe that President Putin is acting in good faith. He said he plans to act with good intentions, as he told the president yesterday. And I take him at his word.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Solyar, and there will be no usual countdown of time, because here, as in a vacuum, only one time is frozen. 24 hours left. 24 hours during which Putin lied at least several times, while in the United States, people continue to take him at his word. But what does word even mean? Take the word of a resident of Sudra, who debated with our military about why Putin decided to invade a neighboring country, and after the return of the Russian world, he starts talking about the atrocities of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Did he lie? Why did he invade a foreign country? Why Ukraine? Why did he do it? And now, he's facing the consequences. Everything has already been bombed. All right, I'm going home. Thanks for the warm words. You too, guys, you're right. Go to the orphanage, get some bread for yourselves. I'll take the bread.
Soldiers hugged like relatives of ours. We were waiting for you, guys. We were really waiting.
Now you can let our emotions go.
All these mercenaries, as they say. All the soldiers, the Poles. I remember I was struck in the head, covered in blood. They were so angry. They bothered women less. They usually took their anger out on men. But I remember one time, we were riding bikes. We went to the store looking for bread. We got caught, and they said, "Glory to Ukraine." Where could I go? They were fully armed to the teeth. I didn't even have anything to defend myself with. We did what we could to get by.
Then there's another local woman, who repeatedly thanked our defenders for not abandoning her, for even feeding her with meat, bringing firewood, and offering to take her mother to Ukraine for treatment. It turns out, she almost saw with her own eyes how Polish mercenaries, she says, there were almost no Ukrainians among the armed forces, were raping young girls and elderly women in the Kursk region. And one Ukrainian soldier was nearly killed by his own men for giving a ride to a local elderly woman.
If you arrived later, I'd have given you meatballs.
We're not hungry.
Thank you.
Do you?
Yes.
And today, I was lucky. The man brought some meat. So I'm frying meatballs.
Do volunteers bring you food?
No. Right now, I go by myself. Thank God.
Have you been to the humanitarian headquarters?
No. Yesterday I was there, at the orphanage. They gave me a loaf of bread and a bottle of water. There were different people. There were rapists. There were convicts and few Ukrainians. There were mercenaries, Poles. These people were very cruel. One of them raped a girl, and there was another woman, also in Martinivka. She was raped, they wanted to kill her. But she managed to break free. And this woman is 73 years old.
And you say, I take him at his word. You shouldn't take things at face value, you should verify everything. That's why we document everything with photos and videos. Another example is the Kursk encirclement, discussed by Donald Trump for a week. Ukrainian soldiers retreated in the Kursk region, but they were not surrounded by Russian troops. This refutes the statements of US President Donald Trump and Putin, writes Reuters. US intelligence reports Ukrainian forces are under pressure but not surrounded. Putin's statement that Ukrainians in the Kursk region must surrender or die has been called disinformation, aimed at demonstrating Russia's superiority and pressuring ceasefire negotiations. This list of lies from Putin could go on indefinitely, because, here's another example. Trump says Putin wants peace. I believe him. And we say, well, we're not denying it. Putin does indeed want peace, but preferably all of it. Since 2014, Russian soldiers have loved wearing these patches. We need world, preferably all of it. That's all you need to know about any peace talks or initiatives involving Russia. You don't forget this important detail. We might even ask Ukrainian diplomats to present you with one of these patches as a symbolic reminder that whenever Russians use the word peace, what they actually mean is the conquest of new territories, where they can plant their three-colored flags and hastily construct a wooden toilet with the letter Z prominently displayed on the door. For them, there is no other kind of peace, and there can't be. So, the only way to teach them the real meaning of the word peace is to unite all of Europe's efforts and defeat the Russian army on the battlefield. Otherwise, Russian aggression will slowly continue for decades, expanding westward through the Baltic states, testing its impact on Europeans. By the way, the Baltic states are already preparing to confront Russia in 2030. And if the US lifts sanctions on Russia, it could happen even sooner. But do you think the Trump administration is deterred by that? No, they continue to see Russia as a large chunk of land from which they can gain profit or secure deals on rare earth metals. Meanwhile, Europe risks finding itself in President Zelensky's position in the Oval Office. And here, we can only state that the issue isn't about the suit. Bloomberg writes that Macron is preparing for a conflict with Trump over his desire to help Ukraine. The publication states that the French leader, who is always in a suit, by the way, has found himself at the center of attention because he's trying to unite, along with British Prime Minister Starmer, partners who are ready to continue supporting Ukraine. Trump's allies worry about his geopolitical comments. The initiative to unite countries that want to continue supporting Kyiv, as the publication writes, will inevitably escalate the conflict with Trump, as he sees ending the fighting as a way to improve economic and political relations with Russia. They're talking about control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Trump is interested in whether Ukraine can restore the operation of the plant and how Zelensky views the involvement of the US in this process.
I told him, yes, if modernization is possible, we are ready to discuss it with you.
But it seems that it's not entirely clear. Are we discussing modernization, joint management, or transferring nuclear power plants to US ownership? Because US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and President's National Security Advisor Mike Waltz say that transferring the nuclear plants to US ownership would be best protect Ukraine's energy infrastructure. And it's not just about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. For security reasons, the US wants to take control of 4 nuclear power plants in Ukraine.
We have vast technical experience in managing these plants, and if it would be useful for the US to manage nuclear power plants in Ukraine, we can do that. No problem. We can do this, said Chris Wright in an interview with Fox News, emphasizing that sending military forces to Ukraine would not be necessary to manage the plants.
So, once again, we say we need a military contingent to control the ceasefire, and they say, let us just take over the management of the nuclear plants, and that will automatically guarantee that Putin will not attack again. In my opinion, it's a weak guarantee, especially considering that the disease of, I believe Putin is spreading in the US. Even after the conversation that took place between Putin and Trump.
The Russian side, as a general rule, tends to cling to every single word, even if there was no subsequent discussion on the matter. However, if they happen to bring up an issue during a phone call, they will still find a way to use it to their advantage. For example, things like the mention of the joint vote in the UN Security Council, which took place for the first time in a long while, and involved both the American and Russian representatives, are significant. We still clearly remember the highly controversial proposals that were made to remove the word aggression from the official documents of the UN Security Council, which sparked significant debate. That's the message coming from Moscow. They want to initiate a conversation with us regarding a potential ceasefire. There are numerous such concessions, and they seize upon each and every one of them. This is a fundamental part of their information and diplomatic efforts, these particular tricks they use. If you look at all the information that was publicly released after the conversation between the US president and the Russian leader, there's very little of it. When it comes to talking about any specific agreements, we have, I would say, only about 5% of the actual information from what was truly discussed during the conversations.
But even now, we can say the following: Europe has already shown its support for Ukraine. Specifically, Britain, France, and Germany are allocating funds and new aid packages to support Ukraine. Meanwhile, Giorgia Meloni continues to stand for applying NATO's Article 5 for Ukraine without our direct membership in the alliance. Because, in her words, this would best demonstrate to the world that Putin is lying pathologically.
I have taken a clear stance both on the ineffective proposals of other countries and on those put forward by Italy, specifically regarding the application of NATO's Article 5 to Ukraine. This seems like the simplest and most effective proposal of all, especially because it would help expose Putin's potential bluff. If Russia doesn't plan to invade its neighbors again, it's unclear why it wouldn't accept security guarantees.
Article 5, or peacekeepers, Meloni says, decide what security guarantee you are willing to provide to Ukraine. President Zelensky said during a Zoom briefing that peacekeeper numbers in Ukraine depend on the US position. According to the president, if Washington participates in this arrangement, the number of countries and the composition of troops from different countries could increase. However, it seems that by offering us participation in managing the nuclear power plants, the US is trying to avoid a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. This, despite all of Trump's previous promises and agreements, is precisely what Putin is refusing to accept. And that's why, as foreign press reports, another scandal is allegedly brewing, but now between the US and France. Macron is preparing for a conflict with Trump due to his desire to help Ukraine. The publication says that the French leader has once again found himself in the spotlight, uniting, together with the British Prime Minister, countries willing to support Ukraine. Meanwhile, Trump's allies are concerned about the US president's geopolitical statements. The initiative to unite countries willing to provide support to Kyiv, as the publication writes, inevitably escalates conflicts with Trump, as he sees ending hostilities as a way to improve economic and political relations with Russia. Moreover, against the backdrop of Trump's geopolitical maneuvers, the authority of Emmanuel Macron is growing, which is clearly displeasing to Trump, because in his view, only he can be the leader. The French president, who was so weak a year ago that he lost his parliamentary majority in the elections, is back in the spotlight.
I don't think it's just a matter of perception, because Trump truly wants to be the only key leader, not just in the West, but globally. And for him, matters should be coordinated with other dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping. But in the democratic world, he is the one and only, the biggest, the most dignified, and the most handsome. Let's not hide it, this is something he also wants, considering how many hair transplants were done for that and many other reasons. So it's clear that this is extremely important to him. Meanwhile, Macron is now showing himself as a leader. Together with Starmer, they're building a coalition to unite Europe. On the other hand, Trump, along with Musk, is trying to shake Starmer's seat and break Europe apart, taking it piece by piece. They blatantly ignore the European Union, don't meet, and don't communicate even at the level of foreign ministries. The United States is ignoring the EU's foreign ministry. They act on the principle of divide and conquer, communicating only with individual capitals.
Firstly, Macron is the only leader of the great power in the EU who caught Trump's first term. There is also Duda, who was around during Obama's time, but his second term ends in a few months. Macron's long-standing relationship with Trump puts him in a special position. Macron is privileged among EU leaders to inform Trump about EU summit results within 30 minutes. Trump does not communicate with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. In principle, he has never spoken to her since his election. Macron was the first to gather EU leaders after the Munich conference in February, which marked the US reversal, and he and Starmer are currently pulling a coalition of will that can send troops to Ukraine. The new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, the leader of one of the countries on the American continent, was the first to fly to Macron on a foreign visit, and even appealed to Macron to help him cope with Trump. It is not known who this leader is, but it is said that it could be the leader of Mexico. Macron's popularity, while domestically, has grown significantly, from 24% to 31% in just a month. We have always been on the side of peace. We must not succumb to any distortion of value and rhetoric. This is the historic role of France, Germany and the whole of Europe, to be on the side of Ukraine, Macron said at a press conference with Scholz. Here I also want to remind you that just a few years ago, Macron and Scholz came to Kyiv with plans on how to surrender Ukraine, how to make Ukraine sign the surrender. But after seeing everything that Russian troops did in our territories, they were cured of this disease. Perhaps we should call Trump to Ukraine more forcefully. Perhaps his illness called, I believe Putin, would have disappeared without a trace.
Macron and Scholz's position changed not because of their visit to Kyiv. Although, perhaps, it had some psychological impact. But it changed because Ukraine demonstrated its ability to stand firm, fight, and defeat the Russians. And only because of this did attitudes towards Ukraine change. Initially, we were perceived as terminally ill patients, who were being somehow saved in one form or another, either through palliative care or through the attempt to treat the hopeless situation, trying to cure us from the so-called Russian plague. But this situation is quite similar to what happened when Russia launched its attack on Georgia. Everyone understood that Georgia had no chance of withstanding Russia, and, accordingly, they had to accept a bad scenario because the world wasn't ready to step in for Georgia. But with Ukraine, everything changed. European societies reacted differently. It turned out that Ukraine is Europe, not just in Ukraine, but Europe also accepted Ukraine as one of their own. And this resonated deeply with Europeans. Ukraine proved itself as a country that can not only resist but can seriously push back against the Russians. And it's clear that this not only inspires admiration but makes people want to be part of the story of victory.
And along with it, the countdown of 24 hours would start anew.